So tonight's presenter is Mike Greenway K4PI. Mike was first licensed in 1957 and has always been attracted to DXing and building things to help him work DX. He also enjoys building antenna systems for bands 160 through 6 meters, chasing DX on the low bands in the winter and on 6 meters in the summer. He competes in the DXEC Challenge, where you attempt to work all countries on all bands 160 through 6, except 60 meters. Mainly a CW op, until getting interested in the digital modes in recent years due to their ability to help him work new countries for the Challenge Award. Retired from Delta Airlines and flight safety, Mike has 167 DXEC countries confirmed on 6 meters so far. Please welcome Mike, K4PI.
Okay, thanks for everyone coming out. Thanks for having me. Hopefully I can tell you a few things about chasing DX on 6 meters. I know some of you are probably not interested in chasing DX on 6, but maybe some of this information will help you on just working stateside and other places. I can't tell you everything about DXing on 6 during the short time I'll have, but I'll try to do as much as I can, and some exceptions maybe to things I bring up. You might have heard people call this the, let me get out of the way here. You might have heard people call this the magic band, and it is in some ways. You'll see some amazing things happen on 6 meters, but you'll have to do a lot of work to get the most out of it DX wise, so it may not seem so magical after that. Okay, this is a picture of a D-expedition down in the Caribbean. W9DR goes to the Caribbean usually in July every year. I don't remember the exact location, but he normally carries a 5-element Yagi with him. Getting here over the ocean, he really has good propagation into Europe and into the States with no problem. One thing I want to make clear, 99.5% of the time in a year, there is no DX on 6 meters. That's terrestrial DX. So you have to think to yourself, do I really want to spend a bunch of money putting up antennas and, you know, buying amplifiers and things like that just for that short period of time? But I will guarantee you it's an exciting time. That other 0.5% of the time is real exciting. The thing about 6, you can't just casually say, well, I think I'll go work some 6 meters, walk in the shack and see if there's some DX. It's just not going to happen. So you've got to be there at the right time, you know, of the day and of the months. And I'll get into all of that of when should you be in the shack and so forth. This is the order of the importance that I give about 6 meters. First, you've got to know something about propagation. If you don't know a little bit about that, then you're going to be sitting in there listening to dead air a lot. Then the antenna is the next thing you need to know about. Monitoring chat rooms, monitoring DX maps, rig and amplifier, what mode, frequencies, and how to change between modes really fast. So I'll expand on all of that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is propagation. But a little bit of information on this antenna. This is in Mauritius, 3B8. This is a moon bounce operation. You can see the moon up there. He's right there over the sea. I did work this station on EME. So what he did is just lash the beam to the palm tree so he can elevate it and pull it around the tree to keep alignment with the moon there. So he did very well. He did very well from there. So we're going to cover these different types of propagation. These are mainly DXing type propagations. Of course, they do work for stateside also. If you want to know, and this is in one of the handouts, if you're interested in finding out, you know, what makes these propagation modes work and so forth, go to this website. This guy is really sharp, has some really informative information on that website, but it is on the handout, so I won't dwell on that. So First thing I want to talk about is F2. F2 is a layer of the ionosphere that normally we make use of for HF. That's normally what brings our signals back to the earth, up, back down. And these are some of the cards that I've obtained while working F2. Speaking of cards, I don't know if anybody likes QSLs. With LOTW, some people don't like cards, but I'm going to pass these around if you're interested. It's just a few of the 6-meter contacts that I've made. So the thing about F2, unfortunately, most of you are not ever going to be able to experience this. Because F2 comes around when we have peaks in the solar cycle, and it has to get very high solar count wise. The last one that we had that was really good was in 2001 and 2002. We just went through a solar peak a few years ago, but it never got high enough to support any F2 on 6 meters, because what happens is the ionization has to be really intense, otherwise the 6-meter signals, being a little bit shorter, just go right on through. The HF signals like 10, 12 and so forth will be reflected on F2. Yes, sir?
How do you do your working F2?
Well, that's a good question. Normally F2 occurs during the wintertime. It occurs during December, January, during that period of time. The period of time that we're coming up on is, and I'm going to get to this, is the E season, which usually is June and July. So it's real good to have this program now, because that's what we're just fixing to come into for terrestrial DX, is using what they call E-skip. But F2, we just have not had any enough support, because when you start getting really good F2, you'll notice 10 meters will all of a sudden be open. And we haven't had any 10 of any consequence to speak of DX-wise. Let me make sure I didn't skip anything there.
Spotting cluster showed the other day.
This will give you some idea of the flux numbers that we've had in past years. Let's see. Back in 2001, we had to get up to about 213, and things were really good then, because that was the first cycle that I was on the air when we had some F2. And in 1989, there was a good year. Of course, the solar cycle is on an 11-year cycle of rotation. And right now, we're at the bottom of the cycle. The flux right now is about, you see that 69 up there? That's about approximately where we're at right now. So you can see where we've got to go to. We've got to get up into the 200s to have any F2. So work low band right now, and worry about F2 later. But it does occur, like I say, mainly in December and January, if we have any F2. Okay, E-skip, this is what you're going to have to use to work DX if you work any at all terrestrially. These are some cards I've collected working E-skip. E-skip is somewhat similar to F2, except it's during the summertime, during June and July. And they call this sporadic E. You might hear that term also. What that means is there are these little E clouds. In other words, it's not like when you have F2 where it's just kind of a layer up there. These little E clouds just will form up wherever. You don't know where. And it's very hard to predict. Normally they occur during the daytime, although there's some that linger around into the evening hours. So you might have a friend 20 miles away that's copying somebody 10 over and you can't hear anything just because that E-cloud is not in the right place for you. But if you wait a little bit, it might form up for you. There is an E-skip period in January, but normally it doesn't produce any DX. You might hear some stateside stations in January, but normally I never bother because I'm mainly looking for DX. And this is a little something about the layers. Don't want to get out of the camera there. You can notice the F2 layer normally is up here 200 kilometers or better, 250, and it fluctuates back and forth. But you can see it's much higher. So imagine we're trying to go to Europe over here. So you can see it takes less hops to get there. Down here, E-skip, E-clouds are going to be down here maybe 100 kilometers or so. So it's going to take more hops to get over here to Europe. Consequently, your signal is going to be much weaker. So signals may not be as strong as you would like with E-skip, but it can easily be done. You can work a lot of DX on E-skip. Normally, in the summer, say starting 8 o'clock in the morning, it's hard to know when it's going to open, but 8 o'clock up to maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that's kind of a prime time you want to be kind of watching. Usually after lunch it dies off for a little bit, then around 4 o'clock in the afternoon we may get another run at it for another couple of hours to Europe. And we actually do get Japan in here a number of times in the summer. But that's on a different type of propagation, and I'll cover that. You hear Caribbean and stuff like that during the daytime. In fact, we've already had some Caribbean openings into South America, mainly northern South America, a lot of stateside stuff. But you can't predict E. You can have like a really great day. You work a bunch of stations, you're like, I can't wait to come back tomorrow and get on. You come back tomorrow and there's nothing there. It's just very unpredictable. But the June the 21st is kind of the center point of E season. So it kind of builds up. The closer you get to that day, the more chances of having E-skip, the better your chances are. But you can't predict it, so you're just going to have to either have something, there's some sites you can monitor to see what the activity is, see whether you think you need to get to the shack or not. Unfortunately, you guys that are working day shift, it's going to really hurt you on trying to work stuff. It's kind of a retired guy's game, unfortunately.
Remote radio.
Okay, this is I see a little bit of this. It's called TEP, it's trans-equatorial propagation. What happens here is it jumps from, say here around Atlanta, down into the southern part of South America. Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, down through that area, Falkland Islands. And I won't go into the mechanics of it, but it does happen a couple of times a year when we get a little bit of that propagation. And this is the one for going to Japan. It's called summertime solar propagation. It's kind of hard to imagine working Japan on 6 meters from here in Atlanta, but I think I've worked probably 250 or more Japanese QSOs. They're not strong, and of course you're going to have a pretty good signal. And I have had friends to work with 100 watts, but it's not easy. You're going to have a pretty good antenna. But again, a strange mode of transmission. At that K9LA site, he might go into this a little bit. There was a QST article on what they think is going on as to why we get signals in here from Japan. But it can extend a little further. It can go into China and Taiwan. I have heard China and Taiwan using FT8, and I actually worked a Philippine station last year on FT8 via SSSP. Let's see what we have. Normally this kind of skips over Alaska. You would think, well, hey, we're going to Japan, we should be able to work Alaska and everything else. But not to say that you might not hear a KL7, but I think I've only heard maybe one in the number of years that I've been on that was on at the same time as the Japanese were in there. So this is the last mode, and this is when you get really crazy and want to spend a lot of money. This is called EME. This is Earth, Moon, Earth. I thought someone had a question about that. So basically what you're doing is you're bouncing your signal off of the moon back to the Earth. So this gives you unlimited range on 6 meters. You're not depending on F-skip and E-skip and so forth. And you can see some of the places I've worked. I would never work some of these. I've worked whoops, wrong one. That one in the center, that's Mongolia, JT5DX. So you would never work that on any other propagation mode. Even on F2, I don't think it's possible. There's Palau, and a lot of good ones in there. Northern Cook. I work EME because, again, like I was introduced, I work the DXCC Challenge, which means I'm trying to collect all the countries I can on the bands 160 through 6. So I kind of, instead of trying to rely just on terrestrial, I ended up started working EME. I haven't worked that many because there aren't that many stations on EME. I've probably, out of all the DXCC countries I have on 6, probably only about 11 of them are actually new countries that I didn't work in some other manner. So it's a job to get on EME, but it can be rewarding. This shows a little bit of what goes on during the year as to some of the propagation modes. Down here, June the 21st is the center of E-skip and SSSP being the very best that it can be. So either side of that date is where you'll be working either stateside or DX. Most nights on 6, there'll be lots of, most days and nights, there'll be lots of stateside operation. So that's on this path here. That's on the summer solstice, which is centered, which is on June the 21st. Now this mode I mentioned earlier, the TEP, that occurs on the equinoxes, either on spring or fall. You might work a little TEP. Some years you just don't hear any TEP. It's very hard to predict that also. If we did have any F2, which I don't see happening in a long time, it would occur centered around December the 21st. You do have a little E-skip in January, but there's normally not any DX involved with that. Okay, so let's move. We did the propagation, so let's move on to antennas a little bit. On it, like on the any band, the bigger the better. I mean, it doesn't matter how much you spend on the radio, you've got to have a good antenna and good coax and so forth. This is a couple of antennas that I have at a farm location. It's a couple of 9-element M-squares that are stacked. One's at 95, one's at 65. So there are a lot of different brands of antennas. It's pretty much, choose your own. But if you like to build stuff, this gentleman, YU70F, has a lot of designs on the internet. You can get all the information. They're pretty simple. You can buy a lot of this hardware you can buy off the internet to mount the elements and so forth. But they make some really nice antennas. Now, if you want to do a little EME and you don't have much land, but you do have a backyard, this is really bare bones here. This is where you go out there and Armstrong-wise, you elevate it and then you can rotate it. So nothing is impossible if you just feel like you got to work EME. This probably wouldn't be real great on terrestrial, but you would work stuff. You could bring it back down to no elevation and still use it. Because normally on 6, if you can get something up 20 or 30 feet, you're good to go. Because 20 feet is a full wavelength above ground on 6. And most of our HF beams, we only get those a half wavelength above ground more often than not. And you don't have to be dead on the moon if you're doing EME. You can be off 5 or 10 degrees, it's no big deal. You just run out there once in a while, move a little bit, because imagine the moon's maybe 250,000 miles away, depending on the day. So your signal, by the time it gets there, it starts out here, and it's like out here when it gets there. So there's very little of the energy actually reaches the moon, actually hits the moon. And I've seen figures where you only return about 7% of what you sent up there. So it's going to be pretty weak coming back. Usually JT65, which is a digital mode, is what's used on EME. Here's another setup. This is 2 and 6 meters. But you noticed in the last one there, the guy had, the antennas were horizontal. But if you'll notice, he's got an insulator in here to keep the boom from interfering with the elements since they're horizontal. So you can get away from that by making the elements vertical, and then you can just use a continuous piece of aluminum all the way across. So you've got to have what I would call intelligence, not this type of intelligence, but CIA type intelligence when you're operating. What's going on, what are people working. So you've got to use these things called DX maps and DX chat. This is a picture of one of the maps. Usually it's quite a bit more cluttered with stuff, but this is an example. Just shows you stations that are working between each other, and also shows this Puerto Rican station going up over into to Europe. This shows a really good day. This was, I think, in 2017, late one afternoon. You can see from here down in southeast, we've got signals coming out of Europe and also going to Japan at the same time. We don't get too many days where that's simultaneous. This is late in the afternoon because the JAs don't come in here until around their sunrise, which is about 4:30, 5 o'clock our time in the afternoon. So we still had propagation to Europe that late. Normally propagation to Europe kind of starts dying out about that time. But this is one of the things, this is called dxmaps.com. That's something to put on your phone or wherever and keep an eye on what's going on, who's working what, what part of the U.S. is going to Europe and so forth. I need another hand here. Okay, this is something I use a lot. It is a great item for DXing or even not DXing. It's called PSK Reporter, free to download. And You can actually use it on any band, but this is on 6 meters. What you can do is put out a CQ, and what will happen, there's hundreds and maybe even thousands of these PSK reporting stations that send data back of anything they hear. They send it to a central clearinghouse, and then if you put your call in and say, show me all the people that are hearing K4PI, it will come back and it will give you how many minutes ago did they hear you, what was your signal report. I think I was actually beaming to Europe, but I was being heard back into central USA and even up into Washington State. But what you can use it for is to see, am I getting out at all? You know, what's going on here? Like when I want to work Europe in the summertime, if I think there's a possibility, I will call CQ and then look for some reporting stations to show that, yeah, you're being heard over here. So then I can just keep on calling CQ, hoping somebody will come back. This was an EA8 station on the Canary Islands down here that I was hearing at the same time. But this is a real handy program, because if you end up showing you're only being heard like, you know, 1 or 2 stations, you may need to work on your antenna a little bit. This is a chat room that I get in quite often. ON4KST is the thing to remember. I think it's listed here.
Yeah.
Right there. He has a bunch of chat rooms. Low band chat room. He's got about 3 different 50 megahertz chat rooms. The Region 2 chat room is the one that would be most helpful for you, because you can get in there and you can see what the other guys are saying that they're hearing. Quite often some of the DX stations will come down, talk to some of the guys and say, hey, let's move off frequency, let's go here and try to go there and so forth. And it also has a map that you can use to kind of show what's being heard where. Also it has a spotting window over here showing who's on what frequency. So you really need some of this intel to kind of help you out instead of just sitting there spinning the dial or sitting there watching the screen hour after hour. You could use this stuff to give you a clue. Is there anything out there at all worth even going to look for? So finally we get down to rig and amp. This is, I use a K3S now. Any radio is fine if it's got 6 meters on it. You might need a preamp to help you out just a little bit. Sherwood Engineering has if you want to see sensitivity on radios, Sherwood Engineering posts some of the different radios and, you know, what's their sensitivity, selectivity, all of that kind of stuff. That's not to say that it's absolutely the best on top, but gives you an idea that you're getting, you know, you're in good shape if you're up near the top. Now we get down to the truth here. You're going to need, you're probably, if you're really serious about DX, and if you just want to work stateside, you don't care who you work, if you accidentally work some DX, well, that's fine too. Then you probably may not need an amp. This amp is out of WSB. When WSB went from, you know, it's not the WSB amp, it's World. They had about 55 of these in their transmitter. These are 1 kilowatt solid state units. And the gentleman that was, I don't remember his name, was the engineer at Channel 2, gave away all of those modules to hams if they said, hey, I'll make use of this. So at my farm location, I did set up one of these. You have to put a TR unit with it and a filter and a power supply. But you end up with a nice solid kilowatt amplifier once you put some fans and, you know, done a little work with it. But it certainly helps you, because when 6 opens, and it can be fleeting, I mean, it can just, all of a sudden you hear it, and 3 or 4 minutes later it's gone, you know, and if you didn't work them then, well, you might hear them again and you might not. So it's better to, you know, have your full deck of cards when you get ready to try and work something. I converted my first amp on 6 was an SP220 that I converted to 6 meters. It was a fun project, and it put out about 800 watts. There's some guy up north that actually, I'm trying to remember his name, but there's a guy that converts SP200s and SP220s to 6 meters if you decide not to do it yourself. But very, very handy. I worked a lot of DX with using that amp. So we finally get down to what mode, and I'll probably get booed like I do at a lot of the meetings that I go to. I used to be a CW man, that's all I worked, but when the FT8 came along, I had to go where the DX was, because they left the CW band, all went down to FT8, so if they would all go back down to CW, I'd be right down there behind them. But unfortunately, that's just nature of the beast. And as you know, I won't leave this up here too long for you non-FT8 guys. But you can't argue with the sensitivity of FT8. Now I get the argument, oh, it's my computer, or your computer, and that type of thing. But if ARRL said we're not going to count that for DXCC, then I'd be gone. I'd be out of there. But got to do what I can. So this is just a screen. Most of you guys are probably familiar with this. This is JT65. Before FT8 came along, I used JT65 for making contacts. But primarily all of my contacts are CW. But there's FT8 ones are starting to grow. And talking just a little bit about frequencies for some of you guys that haven't been on 6, and especially with field day coming. Usually every day in field day, a lot of people that aren't aware of, what segments of the band should you be in or you should not be in. Normally, CW-wise, 50080 to 50105, and then that's plus and minus, that's a little variable, is where you're going to find the majority of CW. Now, down below 50080 is where you find the beacon, what they call the beacon band. And what those are automated transmitters running low power, so that maybe you can spin across there and all of a sudden you're hearing all these beacons, the band is open somewhere, and they normally put their grid square on there, and you can tell, where's the band open to. So those are all down below 50080. And here in the U.S., most of them, the U.S. ones are 50050 up to about 50080. The ones below 50050 are DX beacons, and occasionally you might hear one of those if you're lucky. Now the segment, and this is something important, 50.100 to 50.124, they call the DX window. I would ask you not to use that area other than to call a DX station. If you hear some stateside station in there calling, please don't answer it. This is kind of set aside for DX stations to be able to call, not to be able to hear them. But it's okay to call them, just don't call CQ and don't answer any stateside stations. Because a lot of times during field day, some guys say, well, hey, we can start operating at 50.100, and they just jump down and start calling field day. If you would, please stay 125 and up. That's the normal sideband range for non-DX. Now, if we were to have a really good day for DX, you would hear DX stations above 125 also. You might hear Europeans up there. Now, let me jump back real quick, break off from this antenna-wise. You have to be realistic on what you're going to hear. If you're using a dipole, I can't guarantee you how much DX you're going to hear. You might hear some Caribbean, a little bit of South America. European, I can't guarantee you. If it's a really good day, you might. like I was saying earlier, the bigger antenna, better your chances are on hearing and working something. Usually I like to see some at least 7 elements. M-Square has a 7 element Yagi, weighs 17 pounds. You know, I mean, most of us can do that one hand. But it has a very nice gain, and your chances are greatly increased for working DX or stateside for that matter. So again, 50, 125 and up for sideband. And if you have to, you can operate CW up here. You might hear somebody up here on CW, but that's not the norm. As you get on up higher in the band, 50.190, and then in that general area, you're going to hear EME on JT65. You get on up into the 276, 79 area, JT65 HF and JT9. There's quite a number of different modes used on 6 meters, but the one most popular is 5313. That's if sometimes you can't hear anything on the band, but 5313 you're gonna hear something, and that's where most people hang out. But I can tell you, last year it got so crowded that 50.323. A lot of the Europeans like to use that DXing wise. So I love for them to go up to 323. You get up there, it's nice and clear, and kind of get away from everything else. And I have seen stations using 333. So I think in years to come, there are going to be more frequencies, you know, maybe laid out for FT8. But right now, this is what we got to work with. One thing I wanted to bring up about FT8, if you are an FT8 operator, there's a lot of guys in town. When we're working DX in the mornings and afternoons, Europe likes to hear us on the odd sequence, and so consequently we have to listen for them on even. So if you can, and you know it's not always possible, but if you're going to CQ or something like that, try to use odd to do it on that way. When we all stand by and listen on the even sequence is pretty clear. And unfortunately in the afternoons the JAs want us on even. So late in the afternoon, if you see good, you could try to stay on even. You can't always do this, but if you're going to CQ, try and do that. So if you put up a big enough antenna and get an amplifier and that type of stuff, you might end up with your call and name and that thing. I kind of skipped over a few things, but I think I hit the highlights. I think we got just enough time for any questions and answers questions, I should say. Okay, so I baffled everybody here. So okay. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, Mike, the frustration I have, I'm not a DXer, but I like to get the terrestrial, the local this stuff. But I can't seem to find a good thing that I can count on for spotting. Like you say, sometimes Athens will hear stations, we don't hear them. You'll hear stations I don't hear. I mean, when you go on the spotting network, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. You're getting K5 spotting New England.
Right, you have to kind of watch for the guys that are in your area to be spotting stuff.
I watch for that one guy that's on there all the time over there in Atlanta.
The DX maps.
Well, I can tell it's open, or sort of open, but
yeah,
just kind of funny. I mean, I was just thinking, this day and age, who's the guy here in Atlanta that's on 6 all the time over on the east side of town? I think.
Is a W4. I saw.
Yeah,
W4 IMD.
IMD. So I watch for him, his spots, because he spots all the time. So
right.
He spots stuff like
yeah,
that.
Yeah, you can do that. I usually talk on Skype with a lot of my friends that are on 6 at the same time, and we kind of say, okay, I'm hearing this, I'm hearing that, and so forth.
But for me or us, I mean, it seemed like in this day and age there ought to be something that was just Atlanta, somehow that dings my phone, and, I mean, I'm just saying that, you know, we can put a man on the moon, but we can't get 6 meter
Well,
alerts. you
yeah,
know?
yeah, I guess, I mean, this DX map, it's called dxmaps.com. That guy's pretty handy, because, you know, just looking at this map here, I don't see anything going on in Georgia, and you know, on a day where it's really good, you know, this would be blown up a little bit. But you would see people going from this area to Europe or Caribbean or wherever.
Sure, you know, I fumble around at it, but it's kind of, when you stop and think about the big picture, you're trying to get new people on. Some of our people will put something on the local list, you know.
Right.
But of course, if you don't read your mail till later that day, that's too late.
Right.
But it seems like there ought to be, in today's day and age, there ought to be a way, almost like the tornado alerts, you know. You
Right.
put your bottom,
Yeah,
your zip
yeah.
code in, and it would say 6 meters is open to all these places. You know, RBN, kind of,
Yeah.
skimmers, like skimmers. were
Right, well,
located.
yeah, the PSK is basically RBN.
Well, I understand
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just a little frustration I've had. I guess I'm not serious enough or something.
Yeah, if you get serious, I'll give you my Skype address.
Oh, well, okay. Private.
Yeah,
Charge for it.
yeah, there's probably about 8 or 10 of us in the Atlanta area that we call, I guess, Rabid or Mad Dog stage of DXCC. So, I mean, I rarely go anywhere in June or July. I'm like constantly watching. You know, if I have to go and get groceries or something, I'm watching. I mean, I'm watching my telephone. You know, with something like this to, you know, something pop up, because I've worked stations that I've heard once and I've never heard again. You know, if I had not worked them just then, and I know that sounds a little crazy, but you had to be there. You know, if you weren't there, it's gone, and, you know, just, you know, it's too bad. So, you know, that's the difference between, you know, a casual DXer and a kind of rabid DXer. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What kind of preamps do you use?
Well, I'm using the K3S now, which of course it has the preamps built in, and that's plenty good. Now the old K3, they had an outboard preamp you could buy. I would highly recommend that if you don't have the outboard preamp for the aircraft. Yes, sir.
Mike, are you doing any of the same stuff on 2 meters?
No, and I hope they never, because it's not in the challenge. I hope they never put 2 meters in the challenge. Somebody was talking about doing that, and I said, no, please don't. I've got enough stuff to worry about without having to pick up another van. So I primarily work 160 in the wintertime, because that's where I need the most countries for the challenge. I work 6 meters in the summertime, and the other stuff in between, whenever it might happen along. Real quick, any last ones? I think that's going to be it, Darryl. All right, yes, sir. Thank you.